Tony Little, who is the head of Eton College. He's going to be talking about bursaries. He'll talk for some time, and then there will be an opportunity for questions. So think of your questions, and it's a perfect opportunity for you to ask everything that you ever wanted to know. Please welcome Tony Little.
Good morning. I have come here this morning to talk a little bit about how the independent sector helps those who wish to have an independent education for their child begin to afford it, because it is, as you very well have discovered, an expensive business, and it is necessarily so. Independent schools are non-profit making organisations, yet at the top end, for a big boarding school like mine, the fees can be around £30,000 a year. Now, short of robbing a bank, it is sometimes hard to know what one can do to square that particular circle. But independent schools in the main, certainly from the tradition of the great public schools, are charitable foundations, not just in a nominal sense, and not just in a way that makes it a coconut on the pole for political opponents to shy at, but they are genuinely charitable because they have been giving very significant financial support over many years. My own school was founded in 1440 and was expressly designed to take 70 scholars who paid either no money at all or very little money. So that's a tradition of nearly 600 years, and so you find it in very many schools. It's a big industry. Looking at the figures throughout the independent schools sector, through the ISC information, for example, one sees that in this past year, 164,105 pupils have been in receipt of significant help with their school fees at independent schools. And that represents, and this is a figure which strangely you don't see batted about in the press very much. Perhaps it doesn't fit a certain political view. But that is 33% of all the students in independent schools receive some kind of financial help. That's an astonishing figure. Can you think of any other business or industry, any other going concern that needs to raise money in order to survive and thrive, that will have fully 1/3 of the potential fee-paying, income-generating people in its organisations who are receiving financial help? It is remarkable, and more so than in any other country. The value of that help is more than £660 million a year. So this is a significant industry in itself, the business of offering financial support. And the other figure worthy of note, I think, is that twice as much assistance, financial assistance, is given in the form of bursaries as they do in scholarships. Now, I want to try and clarify, I hope, some innate confusions in this world, because although we're very well intentioned in independent schools, we do our best to confuse you. We confuse you with a whole set of terms that interlock and shift their meaning. What is a scholarship? What is a bursary? You find scholarships that appear to be wholly related to academic ability, for example, but you'll see the word scholarship also used to describe a fee reduction. Where do we begin to make sense of it all? Well, I think if we can look across the pond to the Americans, we'll find perhaps in typical fashion a rather blunter way of describing this landscape. So let's use the American terminology for a moment. The Americans talk about merit awards and straightforward financial assistance. So if we talk about merit awards, most of these in the British independent sector would be described as scholarships, although, as I've just said, the word can be used in other ways as well. But a merit award, typically and most traditionally, would be related to academic ability, usually of a high order. Now, if you go back in time, many of the independent schools that had academic award, and still have, ran them entirely on the basis of ability without regard at all to financial need. So it was quite common when I started as a headmaster 20 years ago to discover that a school's top two awards will be a complete 100% remission of the school fee for 5 or 7 years, irrespective of family income. And the idea there was to celebrate the brightest and the best, to pull them into your school, and to make sure the school down the road didn't pinch them. So it was a competitive act. My school also had a couple of 100% scholarships 20 years ago. We took the move some years ago to reduce that amount because quite clearly it's potty. It is not the way to use your monies to best effect. And now my school has an automatic 10% remission of the fee based on merit for the very brightest or the top musicians, but all the rest is means tested. And this is now much more normal. You will find some schools still offering as much as 50%, say, or purely on the basis of merit. But there has been a sea change in the last 5 years, last 5 to 10 years perhaps, during which schools are now much more focused on means testing families. I'll come back to that in a moment. But these merit awards are not just for the academic, but they may be for music, they may be for sport, for art, for design, for chess, for whatever particular niche, quirk or peccadillo an individual school may have. And it's very well worthwhile researching the range of options available. But you shouldn't expect significant remission off the fee through the merit award system these days. You may strike lucky, but most schools will be acting in the way I've just described. There is a footnote issue, perhaps, to do with merit awards, which is worth just pondering upon for a moment. I have some qualms about merit awards generally. For example, I can see how you can assess someone for his or her academic ability at the age of 11 or 13. There's a lot of proven record showing how a student will develop. I can see how you can do it for music, because musical ability is demonstrated very young. It's much less clear to me how you can qualitatively assess an artist at the age of 11 or 13 and believe that they're somehow going to be the brightest and best of the next generation. So it's something of a movable feast, I think. However, the real nub of what I want to talk about is not the merit award side of things, it's financial assistance as it is most generally given, what typically we call bursaries. Most bursaries these days are means tested. Some schools will offer a discount off the fees without detailed examination of family finances. Now, you may find that's a fortunate thing in your circumstance. Personally, I would suggest a degree of caution, that if a school is discounting fees without having a proper process of means testing, it may say more about the school than it does about the business of giving money to those who need it most. Bursary systems vary hugely. I'm just going to talk a moment about how we run things to give you a flavour of one school, which I think now is fairly close to being a norm. At Eton College, we look at all the candidates who are interested in a place when they are aged 11, 2 years in advance of coming. And we do this to give ample time for parents to know where they stand. We have an assessment at the age of 11, and a parent will in effect get one of 3 letters, each of them specifically written to the child, but the message is broadly on 3 lines. Either 1, splendid, your son looks like the kind of boy who would thrive at our school. He has a conditional place, conditional on passing common entrance at the age of 13, which almost all boys will do. The second is, he's done very well, competition has been intense, he's on the waiting list. And the third letter is, sorry, we don't think it's going to work, suggest you look elsewhere now, when you still have plenty of time. At the point we assess boys at the age of 11, we take no account of financial circumstance. Once families have received that offer letter, there is then the ability to apply for a bursary. And you would receive a means testing form, give all your family information, and we will then evaluate it. Now, I'm often asked, is there a ready reckoner, a quick way of having some understanding of how much money you can get on a bursary? And we don't publish those figures. Why not? Well, because we take as much information into account that reflects the particular situation of a family. So, for example, if a family with a son who wishes to come to Eton is a family of, say, 4 children, the fact there are these other siblings is taken into the equation. as are other family circumstances. So we can't produce a quick model, a quick answer. It's not a question of saying, our family income is X, therefore the bursary will be Y. It is more nuanced than that, and we believe that is fairer to the families. But we will go through that process, usually within 6 months of the conditional offer places going out. So a family will have a pretty good indication of how much bursary money might be available. Up to that point, we are, as the Americans call it, needs blind. We want to attract the boys most suited to our school environment, whatever background they come from. But at the moment, our pot is limited, so there will come a point when the bursary money runs out. As with many other independent schools, we are making a great effort to increase the size of that pot. And our ambition in years to come is that we will be totally needs blind in the way, for example, that Harvard University is, where they're able, in theory at least, to support the financial needs of every single student who has a need attending as a student. So the process of going through a bursary is time-consuming. It's pretty personal. You have to be upfront about your financial situation. You may well be applying for a bursary to a school where they will have home visits, and there are various organisations that do that for a school, visiting the home just to chat to people to establish the bona fides. Because, think of it from a school's point of view, you have limited resources and you wish to distribute it fairly. It is not in any way an attempt to be intrusive or nosy, but a way to establish that what people claim is true, which in the vast majority of cases, in my experience, it is. But sometimes it isn't, and you do need to identify those cases. So there will be a process through which, as a parent, you will have to go. But the exercise is engaged in genuinely by schools. And I just want to repeat this point. If I allow myself to be irritated, being a thoroughly calm and equable kind of person, it's on occasions when one somehow gets the impression from the press that political pressures are being exercised on independent schools somehow to oblige them to get off their backsides and do something worthwhile in the community. From all my dealings with schools, in over 20 years of headship, in 35 years of being in teaching, the leitmotif, the common factor, has been the commitment of those schools and the people within them to spread the benefit of the best education they can provide to the widest range of people. It's deep felt, and it is an earnest and purposeful attempt to embrace as wide a range of people. And I come back to the point I made earlier. We're very clear what we want. We seek boys of character and ability, not just academic ability, but boys who will have the resilience and the ability not just to survive but to thrive in our school environment from wherever they may come. And part of the joy of a school, and this, if you like, is the selfishness, why should a school do this? It's because you're trying to create as diverse, as rich, as interesting a culture as is possible. Now, I suppose if you're an oligarch, you may have a different view of the word, but if I was some drippingly rich oligarch wishing to have my son in a boarding school, I specifically would want him to be in an environment with the widest mix and type of people that is possible, not to be with like-minded other oligarchs. I stress in extreme. But it is a situation with which we deal. And to put it at its most emphatic, in my school at the moment, we have boys who come from families who live in inner-city tower blocks in London. I have boys whose families live in castles. And as I said in a moment of irritation to a pushy journalist recently, these days we don't discriminate against the boys who come from castles. But it is important we have that mix. It's to everyone's benefit. The motivation of the system of bursaries and scholarships as it is expressed in modern independent schools seems to me to be thoroughly worthwhile and a genuine boon to society. How these different systems operate, of course, is a matter for those individual schools. I'm going to pause right now because I will take any questions. It's usually my experience in these kind of events that it's the questions that produce the most focused and interesting angles. So, over to you.
Does anyone have any questions? Lady over here.
Thanks very much for that. I'm Susan Hamlin from the Good Schools Guide Advice Service. We get a lot of parents interested in bursaries, and increasingly we're having parents who are anxious about applying because they're either in the creative arts or they're in other sort of work where they're short-term contracts. And one year they may make vast amount of money, the next year they may not have a clue what they're going to make, and consequently they're reluctant to start the process. Particularly obviously if it's the year when they are making a lot of money because they feel they'll be assessed on that, and then what happens next year if they don't get any work at all. What can I say to parents like that about not necessarily just your school, but schools in general where bursaries are obviously on offer and very attractive, to encourage them to at least inquire?
Two things. At my school, certainly, we run, I think, an attractive prepaid fee scheme. So if you have clover in a given year, there should be an opportunity in most schools to be able to front load the expenditure with an attractive return rate. Well worth investigating prepaid fees schemes. The second point is that many schools now, I think, review their bursaries annually. We certainly do. It's quite a chore, I have to say. It's a big burden on the school, but it seems to us the fair way and the best way to try and reassure families that their particular circumstances are going to be looked at.
I'll come back to you. I have a question for you. You obviously have a pot of money, and you talk about the Harvard experience of being needs blind and having a decent amount of money where you can genuinely pay for anybody who needs that. Why not use that pot of money to reduce the fees to attract a wider range of people coming through anyway?
Because the net effect would be less attractive to everyone involved. You talk about reducing the fees. If we applied all the monies we have, we could reduce our fee, but it would still be out of reach of a large number of the people who might wish an education. The bursary system has the singular advantage that if it is means tested, it spreads the opportunity across a very wide range of society rather than keeping it focused. In other words, if we used all our bursary money to reduce the fee, you might expand the band of people who could afford it, but it would still be a very limited band.
Other questions from the audience? Lady over here.
I was just wondering, does the bursary live with you throughout your school career at Eton College, or is it something that you were saying then that is reviewed annually? And may change?
Both. That is to say, the assumption whenever we give a bursary is it will last for the 5 years, but we do actually review it every year. I have to say the considerable majority, I haven't got a figure, but 80-90% of the bursaries we run don't change, because most family financial circumstances don't change that much. The commitments are the same. So, but very occasionally we have a situation when, for example, a family is in receipt of a bursary because one or other of the parents, the major breadwinner, is out of a job, but gets a job, and happily gets a job, and then the financial circumstances change, so they would have less need of the bursary. But it can work the other way around too. We can have situations where people are on, for example, say a 30% fee remission bursary, but the family circumstances change for the worse, and they end up having 60, 70, 80, 90%.
Well, I think that's the thing, you don't want to sort of start them in education and then suddenly realise, down the line you can take.
I think it's like most things in life. If you look at the potential for things going pear-shaped, if you stack up the figures in advance of you, you wouldn't do anything at all. Yeah. Just close your eyes and go. But you are quite right, of course, to make the point that this is a huge commitment for parents. If you're thinking in boarding school fees terms, you're talking 30,000 times 5 years, plus other bits and bobs added on. Huge amounts of money.
Fabulous, thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Any other questions we have over here? Tony,
Thank you.
What about the perhaps perceived stigma of being a pupil that is in receipt of bursary or help with the fees?
Well, that, of course, presupposes that anyone would know you're in receipt of fees. And why would anyone know? The only people at my school, and I'm sure I speak for the vast majority of schools who would know, would be the people on the Bursary Awards Committee, which is probably a bursar, maybe the headmaster, maybe a couple of other people. And if it is a bursary that is being reviewed and therefore an updated report might be necessary from, say, a housemaster, then he would know as well. But no one else. Certainly no teachers would know, no boys would know. Why would they? Here's an interesting, perhaps this gives you just a little insight into the way things have changed. If we go back a generation at Eton College, the focus of charitable endowment was spent on the 70 King's Scholars. This reflects the original 70 scholars of the foundation when Henry VI established the school. And the 70 King's Scholars come into the school by a separate examination. It's some way above common entrance. They used to be in receipt of automatic fee remission of 100% or 50%. That's all gone, as I said earlier, but is now means tested. But here's the thing. The King's Scholars, who are easily able to be identified because they wear a special scholar's gown and they live in a different house and they're seen as a bit of a kind of Praetorian guard of the academic establishment, they receive remarkably little of the means-tested money. I think I'm right in saying of the 70 King's Scholars at the moment, only something like 7 are eligible for extra means-tested money beyond 10% of the fee, because they tend to come from pretty well-off, aspirational, very well-educated families, the kind of families where you're going to have boys who think in a particular way at the age of 12 or 13 and can take that exam. I'm keen to retain the institution of college because of its symbolism as a statement of academic intent. But that's nothing to do with bursary money or to do with what these days is called social outreach. The vast, vast, vast majority of boys who are in receipt of financial help to be at Eton College are spread amongst all the other houses in a way that you could not begin to distinguish them. And I repeat the point, there's no reason why anyone would know, unless they chose to reveal it themselves. Quite a lot of the boys themselves don't know, of course.
My question is very much related to that, in as much as obviously the boys themselves do know, and if you live in a council estate, you know that you don't live in a castle. And I just wondered what schools such as yours do in a way to homogenise the boys in that respect, so that, I mean, I get a lot of parents saying, oh, we couldn't send him to a school like that because, you know, he wouldn't be able to bring his friends home, you know, we don't ride to hounds on this estate, you know. It's that sort of thing.
Well, my response to that would be, why not? Why not go back to the council estate? I mean, without being too tedious about it, I came from a family where I was the first person in my family to be educated over the age of 14, let alone go to a fancy school, sixth form, university, all the rest of it. I was educated at Eton with all the fees paid for. And this is in the 1960s, the antediluvian 1960s, before we were all politically correct and talking about bursary schemes. And I was not alone, but it was pretty obvious. I mean, I knew my situation, and it's pretty obvious through conversations that my friends, age 13, age 15, age 17, were aware of my situation. And I don't think I'm rewriting history. I don't recall one moment when it was an issue. I mean, teenagers are pretty clued in, and they're pretty responsive. If anything, if a child on a bursary is likely to find an embarrassment in dealing with peers, it is likely to be a teenager overcompensating, thinking that they've got to be more outgoing and more generous because of a kind of back. But in truth, actually, it's water off a duck's back. And there's another thing I would say. In most independent schools, the way people dress in classic English fashion is seen as important. And nothing is stranger, of course, than coming to Eton and seeing all the boys wearing black tailcoats, waistcoats, pinstripe trousers, white shirts, white collars, and seeing the teachers in the same garb. This is a dress-down day for me. This is jeans and a T-shirt, as far as I'm concerned. But there is a really important point here. It may look very strange to the outside world, but if you're a boy who does come from the inner city tower block, or indeed from the castle, Once you're in school, you're wearing school kit, which is strangely anonymising. You're part of it, and you know you're part of it. It has a tremendous bonding effect. I'm a big fan of our very strange outfit, as indeed are the boys. Very interesting. I have 1,300 teenage boys under my care. You name an issue or a problem or a quirk of human behaviour, and of course you'll find it. But I've never once had a boy jib or complain about school dress. As teenagers, they kind of get it. It is being part of a community where those other differences don't matter. I'm just not aware of having situations in boarding houses or around the school where people are pointed at or identified for their social background. And for personal reasons, I'm reasonably sensitive to that. I mean, ding-dong battles about the fate of Arsenal. We're talking teenage years. The kind of preoccupations and concerns, naturally enough as parents we have, about the way our children will be perceived, are not shared by our children.
Thank you. I think this gentleman over here had a question.
Howard Holdsworth from Christ Hospital. If you'd like to see a traditional uniform properly worn, Elliot Godman over here will stand for you.
Very good.
And
Stand
still
up.
wear what all children
Good.
at Christ Hospital wear. So it was just to support Tony's view on uniform. We have 830 children, all boys, all girls wear that uniform. And they had a vote last year, and 830 voted to keep it. So that just supports your point, Tony. The question I was going to ask on your subject of bursaries, you talked earlier about the 70 King's Scholars. Sorry, you talked also about how many, how much broader it is now that the money's going through. Earlier, 33% of children in independent education are receiving some degree of bursaries. Sorry to be personal, but is that mirrored at Eton now? I mean, obviously it's very different to what it was 10 or 15 years ago.
I'm about to give you a politician's answer, which is elliptical, but there's a point. The percentage of boys who receive significant fees at Eton is 20%. But the reason that I am using the word significant is that if you peel away that 33% figure of the sector as a whole, quite a significant number of those will be the odd 10% here, or 5%, or some scholarship amount. By significant amount of money, I interpret that meaning at least half the fees. Our average is 65% of the fee. That's the average across the 20% who are in receipt of fee remission. So that 20%, our target is to make it 33% of significant fee reduction. And we're moving towards that reasonably smartly. One of the great changes I found in fundraising in the last 10 years is whereas a generation ago, if some well-disposed rich person was going to give you money, they'd normally want their name plastered on a building. And we found in this country, there's actually a difference between home and abroad. Abroad, that's still largely the case. But in this country, the serious donors, for example, we had one recently of £8 million, expressly for bursaries, expressly not to have a name attached to it from the donor. So that I think there is a genuine shift in culture and understanding that where there is available money, it should be given in a quiet way along the lines I have described. Let me pause for a moment, because Christ Hospital is the greatest representative in the country of charitable giving and donations to an extraordinary extent. Do you want to give us, I mean, you can blow us out of the water. Give us some facts and figures about what you do, because it is a quite remarkable story. There is no other school in the country, apart from anything else, Christ Hospital has the largest financial endowment. Not Eton College, incidentally, it is Christ Hospital.
Tony, thank you. Just like you, first person of your family educated over the age of 14, I come from a council block of flats just up the road in Clapham and won a scholarship to Christ Hospital in those strange heady days of the 60s. Yes, last year it cost 20 million to run the school at Christ Hospital with 830 children, and the joint parental fee income was 2.6 million. So there's a 17.4 million funding gap. Yes, it comes out of endowment, it comes out of the Corporation of London, it comes out of livery companies, it comes out of private benefactors. But I do think it's a great thing that you hear of schools such as Eton, who over the last 10, 12, 15, 20 years have taken a very different view on scholarship, on bursary, and are perhaps now moving in the way, not in a political sense of doing things, but are genuinely going out and looking for a broader mix. I think that's what Christ Hospital would stand for, is this broad mix, not from one old-fashioned word, class. And I think that's where, thank you for the opportunity, but that's where your school and our school are perhaps doing a great deal more than the public know about.
Yeah.
Is that what you'd like?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. I think that's also a fair remark. I think this is an unsung story in the main, because on the whole it's not the stuff that newspapers want to talk about. There's a phenomenal amount of work and energy going into bursary programmes. Whilst the microphone is on that side of the room, if we move from Christ Hospital to a school with much less endowment, Rencombe College in the Cotswold, Roland Martin is the head there. Roland, do you want to say a word or two about how, with the challenge of little endowment, you are still able to offer bursaries?
Yeah, thank you, Tony. I'd like to say, first of all, having run a boarding house at Eton, I absolutely agree with what Tony was saying. And I had, I think, last year, 10 boys in my boarding house who had significant financial assistance. And
Roland, I think you might need the microphone a little nearer to you.
And then they mixed fantastically well, and you really would not have known. And that's something that's a strength of the school. We don't have a fantastically large endowment, but we do have every year a scholar into the school on a 100% place, and we look at other opportunities to give bursaries and to give scholarships, both on merit and for rewarding in terms of financial assistance. In actual fact, I've just got off the phone this morning from a parent whose daughter left the school at the end of last year, has gone into a sixth form college locally and is very unhappy and wants to know what I can do to support her and to get her back in. And we're looking at seeing what we can do to support a very good case and to try and get the girl back into the school. And I think this is something that all schools want to do. We want to do what's right for pupils and to give everyone a chance and have a fantastic social mix and diversity. I was a student at Rencombe on a 100% scholarship myself, so similar next to the wood round here. Thank you.
Out of interest, it is worth noting, of the monies that schools across the independent sector make available for bursaries, 20% of that money is given by donors. 80% of it is provided by the school, either through surpluses or through the way it's geared into school finances. In effect, if you like, taking some proportion of the money from other fee-paying parents to recycle. That's how it's done.
Question over here. Come round this way. Before I get to you, in that 20%, if I can ask, is that shrinking, that 20% of donorship, is that shrinking in the light of what's going on in terms of the economic climate?
I don't know, to be honest, across the country. We haven't noticed that in our own situations, in terms of the fundraising that we're engaged in. It's only, I have to say, in the last 6 or 7 years that my school has been serious about fundraising to add to the endowment, principally for bursaries and scholarships. For the previous 560-odd years, we relied on serendipity, on someone coming out of the blue and giving us some money. But so we're organised. Interesting cultural shift, I have to say. We're very British in this country. We all see the need. We want money. People want to give money, but no one wants to talk about it. We do it by telepathy, mostly.
Hello there. You and the gentleman from Christ Hospital both said that you aim to try and broaden the mix of children within the school, not restrict entry in that respect. But given that you take children at 13 through common entrance, does that not automatically rule out a swathe of children who are attending state primaries up until the age of 11 and wouldn't even think of applying to Eton College? How does that work? What would happen to a child like that?
I think different schools have different ways of tackling. In our case, there are two routes that we have opened up. The first is that our 11-year-old assessment is designed in such a way, we have a bespoke computer test by the unit at Durham University that provides these things, which is meant to offer something like a level playing field, because you can't prepare for it. So it is perfectly possible to take that test straight from a primary school. It's to do with underlying ability rather than given knowledge. So the doors are open at that point. We also allow boys, if we have made a conditional offer to a boy who's currently at a primary school at the age of 11, it is possible for that boy to take an exam that is not common entrance for entry to the school. So the route exists, but at the moment it is still a small door. That's just demand. It'll grow, I think. We have also instituted what are known as new foundation scholarships, and this has come from recently donated money. And this is for direct entry from state schools at the age of 13. So it bypasses even our 11-year-old assessment, working on the assumption that for quite a lot of families, they may not wake up to the possibility of a school like Eton until their son is a little older. And that is a set of exams we have designed based on the national curriculum to a pretty high level. But it's deliberately aimed at people who have not been to a prep school and have not been through the common entrance route. It is fair to say, however, that at the moment, the considerable majority of boys will take common entrance. Not unusual for a family, and we have good connections with prep schools, as you would expect. It's not unusual for a family to have a boy at a primary school, is offered a conditional place at Eton College, and will then approach a prep school to see if they can have 2 years of education to common entrance, part or all of which the prep school will pay for. And there are a number of prep schools now who will do this. Summerfields in Oxford, for example, have their McLaren Scholarship, which is expressly designed for that purpose. So there are ways.
We have time for a couple more questions, if there are any. Lady here.
Hello there. I wanted to ask about international students and understand a little bit more what was on offer for them and whether you differentiate between, you talk a lot about your feeders coming from prep schools, but what about international students who perhaps aren't taking the common entrance exam and are interested in the bursary side of things?
If a boy from an overseas family, educated overseas, applies in the usual way and is assessed at 11, they will be treated the same as anybody else. We don't have specifically targeted international scholarships, which quite a number of schools do, and for some people from overseas it's worth looking out for those. Not quite true. We do have one at the moment, and this is the nature of dealing with donors and their specific demands. It's a wonderful idea. It's a generous donor. It's an old Etonian. But try this one on for size. As I often say, raising the money for scholarships and bursaries is one thing. Trying to spend it is another. The constraint on this scholarship is that it's for 2 years for a boy, a bright boy who can cope with the academic demands of Eton, who comes from a Palestinian refugee camp. Quite an interesting task to set oneself. How do you begin to find? We actually have our third one who's just arrived. We've been running this for 3 years now, but it's been quite a challenge. We rely on a very nice chap at a school in Ramallah to be our talent scout. Took quite a while to get to that point. I digress. But when it comes to international students, you will find some schools that are specifically open. I can think of various schools, particularly that run the International Baccalaureate programme, for example, who make a virtue of looking for those kind of students. But in our case, we take all comers, providing they come through the system. I'm about to say something which should self-destruct in the ether, and I never said. It's that one of the hidden delights of the entry system we have when we assess boys 2 years in advance is that your average Russian oligarch misses the boat, because he assumes he can click his fingers when his son in 12 3/4 pay the money and get in, by which time, of course, we're full in a vast waiting list. So it's a very useful filter system. It does mean, Eton is very much a British school. We're 90% British, 10% live overseas, and that includes expatriates. So we see ourselves as a British school with a cosmopolitan feeling. But international families are very welcome, but in order to get into Eton, they will have to have thought it through and be committed to the kind of education we offer and been through the process the same as everybody else, whether rich or not rich.
Tony, the purpose of the bursaries and the scholarship system, as you've been at pains to point out, is the fact it's to offer opportunity to pupils who are bright or capable, who might not otherwise have the opportunity because of financial means. You talked about that particular scholarship and the problems of spending the scholarship. Do you personally believe then that a donor should give money without strings attached? And if they give money for a bursary or a scholarship, it should purely be for the good of education and rely on people like yourself to be the expert?
Of course. No brainer. I want all the money. I want to spend it my way. But we always welcome whatever money may be. But an interesting one recently, I've just dissuaded a very well-intentioned person who's going to give us a chunk of money. It'll be just about £1 million, I think, to go into the bursary pot. But for very good reason, misguided but good reasons, he initially wanted this to be specifically directed at a particular ethnic group. I think weaned him off that, apart from the fact we run into legal problems. But it's not helpful. It's not the way it goes about. I have to say, again as a footnote, we do look at the range of types of people we have. But when it comes to reaching out to people from the least privileged backgrounds, who have bright boys who really could benefit from an Eton education, the most difficult demographic, as they call it these days, to connect with, by far in the UK, is the white working class. If we have families from less privileged backgrounds, pound to a penny, they're going to be from other types of other British ethnic groups. And that is, I think, really quite an interesting reflection on where our society is at the moment and how people value education.
One more question.
Sorry, at the risk of being a bit negative, I just wondered when you were taking all of your applicants into consideration, what percentage you felt you had to turn away, not necessarily because of their academic stand or that you felt that they had the right character, but simply because your pot.
Because we haven't got enough cash. Well, we take 250 13-year-olds in a year, so using that figure as a rough guide, of the 250 we will admit, the number of boys who will have been offered a conditional place and be seeking a bursary and for whom we do not have enough money will be fingers of one hand. It'll be 3 or 4 or 5.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our thanks also to Tony Little, the head of Eton College. Thank you very much indeed.